Okay, let's just jump right in. What if one of the planet's most vital creatures just vanished, gone? What would that actually mean for us?
It's a pretty chilling question, honestly. And the source material we're looking at today, this collection called A World Without Bees, it really maps out what that could look like.
Yeah, it does. And our goal here for this deep dive is really to pull out the key takeaways from that source, understand what's genuinely at stake if bees disappeared.
Yeah.
Because it's way more than just missing honey, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Much more. The source paints this picture of like a cascade of consequences. It hits our food, obviously, but also whole ecosystems, the economy, even real culture and how our world looks and feels.
It's all connected.
Such a complex web, and this source helps trace those connections.
So let's start with the basics then, the foundation. What is it that bees do that makes them so, well, indispensable?
It really comes down to one core job. Pollination. They're just incredibly, incredibly efficient pollinators. Nature's best, really.
The main engine for plant reproduction for so many species.
Exactly. And the scale is just vast.
How vast are we talking?
Well, think about this. They're crucial for pollinating something like 80% of all flowering plants across the globe.
80%. Wow.
And if you bring that down to our food, the FAO, that's the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization, they say bees are essential for 70 out of the top 100 crop species. And those crops, they supply about 90% of the world's food.
90%. That's almost everything. So foods we eat every day would just decline or disappear.
You'd see huge impacts, major declines, potential disappearances. The source lists things like apples, blueberries, strawberries, raspberries, avocados, almonds are a huge one, cucumbers, pumpkins.
Foods that are staples for nutrients, not just flavor.
Exactly. But it's not just about the farms and the crops we eat directly. Their role in the wider environment, biodiversity is critical too.
Right, beyond agriculture.
That's where you see that interconnected web really clearly. They pollinate wildflowers, native plants. These are the absolute foundation of countless ecosystems.
They're feeding wildlife, providing habitats.
Precisely. Birds, small mammals, other insects, they depend on the seeds and berries from these bee-pollinated plants. And the plants themselves, they do other vital jobs like holding soil together, preventing erosion.
Even producing oxygen?
Contributing to it, yes. The source really drives home this point. Take away the bees, and that whole intricate system starts to, well, fray. It unravels. It's the whole biological infrastructure.
Okay, so let's zoom in on that agricultural piece first. The direct hit to our food supply. What does the source tell us happens there?
Well, here's a number to chew on. Roughly 1/3. 1/3 of the food we consume depends, either directly or indirectly, on bee pollination.
1/3 of everything we eat. That's massive. And I assume that has a huge economic cost tied to it.
Oh, enormous. A USDA study, relatively recent, put the value of pollinators to the U.S. economy at around $24 billion a year.
$24 billion.
And honeybees specifically. They account for something like $15 billion of that total. Just honeybees.
And the source used almonds
Yeah.
as a really stark example, right? That seemed like a perfect illustration.
It really is. Almonds are almost entirely dependent on bees. California grows most of the world's almonds, something like 80%.
And growing them needs an unbelievable number of bees.
Yeah, it's wild. They need around 1.8 million beehives trucked into California every single year just for the almonds.
Wow.
And that pollination service alone is valued at over $4 billion. So no bees. That industry basically collapses. You'd see incredible shortages, prices would skyrocket, almonds become a rare luxury.
And you'd see similar, maybe not quite as total, but still dramatic drops in other crops.
Definitely. The source mentions studies showing apple production could fall by up to 90%. 90. Cherries, blueberries, avocados again. Huge impacts.
But what about the big staple crops, like wheat, rice, corn?
Right, good point. Those are mostly wind-pollinated, so they'd likely be okay in terms of yield. But, and this is a big but, you lose this massive accessible source of nutrient-dense foods, fruits, vegetables, nuts.
Yeah, the things that provide essential vitamins and minerals.
Exactly. The FAO points this out. Losing these bee-pollinated crops means losing vital nutrients like vitamin A. It could genuinely lead to widespread dietary problems, malnutrition, especially hitting vulnerable communities hardest.
And the economic shockwaves wouldn't just stop at the farm, would they?
Not a chance. It ripples out. Food processing, transport, retail, exports. Think of all the jobs tied to those crops. It would be a massive disruption across the entire food sector.
The source also mentioned this wouldn't hit everywhere equally.
That's a crucial point. Developing nations where agriculture is often a much larger slice of the economy and employs more people, they'd be disproportionately hammered.
Any specific examples?
Coffee comes to mind. It's largely bee-pollinated, and millions of farmers and workers, say in Central America, parts of Africa, depend on it for their livelihoods. A collapse in coffee production, devastating for those local economies.
Okay, so that's the grim picture for food. But the source talks about a broader ecological collapse, too. How does that domino effect play out in nature?
Well, like we touched on, you first lose those wild plants that depend on bees. That means less plant diversity, which makes entire ecosystems weaker, less able to cope with other stresses.
And that hits the animals.
Directly. Food chains get messed up. Birds and small mammals that rely on berries, seeds from those plants, suddenly their food source vanishes, so their populations decline.
Which then affects their predators.
Exactly. It cascades upwards and downwards too, actually. The source mentions impacts on soil health.
How so?
Many plants with deep roots, the kinds that really help hold soil together and prevent erosion, are often bee-pollinated. Lose them, and you increase the risk of soil washing away. Even desertification in some areas.
Wow, even water systems are affected.
Yeah, less vegetation cover near rivers and lakes means more soil and pollutants can run off into the water. That harms fish, aquatic insects, the whole freshwater ecosystem.
It's amazing how much we get from healthy ecosystems without even thinking about it, these ecosystem services.
Totally. And losing pollinators hits those hard. There was a recent study mentioned, 2024, estimating that the loss of pollinators could reduce the value of those services, clean water, carbon storage, flood prevention, by maybe $400 billion globally every year.
That's a staggering figure. And what about other pollinators? Does losing bees hurt them too?
It likely would, yeah. It's another potential crisis layer. Think about butterflies, moths, beetles, other native bees. They often share the same flowers.
So more competition for less food.
Exactly. As bee-pollinated plants decline, there's less nectar and pollen to go around. This puts extra pressure on all the other pollinators, potentially leading to their decline too. It could trigger a much wider pollinator crisis.
It really just hammers home how interconnected everything is. You pull one thread.
And the whole tapestry can unravel?
Yeah. And the source also looks beyond just food and nature at other economic and sort of social ripple effects.
Right. Like other industries.
Yeah.
Yeah, things you might not immediately think of. Cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, many use ingredients derived from bee-pollinated plants. Even textiles, cotton, in some regions, benefit significantly from bee pollination, so you'd see impacts on those supply chains too.
And of course, the beekeeping industry itself just disappears.
Vanishes. Millions of livelihoods globally depend on keeping bees for honey, wax, and increasingly, for those crucial pollination services we talked about, all gone.
Moving beyond the economics.
Yeah.
What about the the social side, the cultural impact?
The source touches on this too. It's maybe harder to quantify, but still important. Think about losing the vibrancy of parks and gardens full of flowers. That has an aesthetic impact, maybe even a psychological one. Urban green spaces become less alive.
It's inviting.
Yeah, and it mentions specific cultural traditions tied to bees and beekeeping in places like, say, Ethiopia or Slovenia. Those unique practices would be lost heritage.
And you mentioned earlier how food issues could worsen inequality.
Yes, that's a major concern. The source points to places like parts of China where, because they've lost so many natural pollinators, they actually resort to hand pollinating some crops. Like people climbing trees with little brushes.
Hand pollination. Seriously.
Seriously. But imagine trying to do that on a global scale. It's incredibly labor-intensive, slow, and hugely expensive.
Completely unworkable for most places.
Totally. It's not a real solution. It would just mean that nutritious, pollinator-dependent foods become luxury items only affordable for the rich. It widens that gap in access to healthy food, hitting poorer communities hardest.
It really drives home how environmental issues and social justice are linked.
Definitely. Now, this whole scenario, this world without bees we've been exploring, it sounds hypothetical, maybe extreme, but the source is very clear. This isn't just some sci-fi future.
We're already seeing the signs.
We absolutely are. Bee populations are declining significantly in many places. That Earth's Society report from 2023, it noted drops of 30 to 50% in some populations recently.
So this isn't a what if for the distant future. It's happening now.
The trend lines are already pointing in this worrying direction. We're on that path.
So what's driving it? What does the source say are the main causes of these declines?
It points to a combination of factors, sort of a perfect storm. Pesticides are a big one, especially a class called neonicotinoids, neonics, which mess with bees' nervous systems.
I've heard about those.
Yeah, they're a major concern. Then there's habitat loss, just fewer places for bees to live and find food, thanks to urbanization and large-scale single-crop agriculture.
Makes sense. Less variety, less food.
Exactly. Climate change is another factor, disrupting the timing between when flowers bloom and when bees are active and need that food.
Oh, right. The synchronization gets thrown off.
Thrown way off. And then you have parasites like the infamous Varroa mite, which devastates colonies in various diseases, including the still somewhat mysterious colony collapse disorder. It's multiple pressures hitting them at once.
That sounds like a really complex knot to untangle. Does the source offer any hope? Any solutions?
It does. It doesn't just paint the bleak picture. It outlines pathways forward, but it stresses it needs action on multiple fronts.
Like what?
Well, reducing pesticide use is key. Banning the worst offenders, promoting farming methods that use fewer chemicals, like organic farming, also actively restoring and creating habitats.
So planting things bees need.
Exactly. Planting pollinator meadows, protecting natural wild areas, even just individuals planting native bee-friendly flowers in their gardens or window boxes. Supporting beekeepers is also vital. They're on the front lines of this, maybe through subsidies or training programs.
And just making people more aware has to be part of it, right?
True.
Yeah.
Education is key. Helping communities understand why pollinators matter, encouraging simple actions like planting lavender or sunflowers, and then there's policy.
Government action.
Yes. We need governments to fund research, create national pollinator protection plans, regulate harmful pesticides more effectively. The source mentions the EU's pollinator strategy as one example of trying to tackle this at a larger scale.
So it sounds like individual actions, like planting flowers, are good. They matter.
They absolutely do. Every little bit helps create refuge and resources.
But the source is saying we also need the bigger picture stuff. Collective action, policy changes.
That's the message. It needs both. From community gardens and individual choices right up to international agreements. And the urgency is real. We don't have decades to wait. Action is needed now to avoid heading further down this path.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, the core message seems clear. Bees are fundamental. They're these incredible pollinators supporting so much of our food, the health of entire ecosystems.
And losing them isn't just a far-off worry. Their current decline is real, and the potential consequences for agriculture, for nature, for our economies, our societies are genuinely catastrophic.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Just how much of our world, the food you put on your plate tonight, the park you walk through, how much of it relies on these tiny, industrious creatures?
Maybe pause for a second next time you see one. Consider just how many threads of your own life, your environment, your well-being are quietly connected to the fate of that single bee.